Hi, my name is Briar, and for 3 months, I prepared for the perfect Christmas. I spent hours making gifts, planning meals, and dreaming of the day my family would finally appreciate my efforts. Then, I received a text from Dad. This Christmas is for adults only. But it wasn't just the text that broke me. It was the photos they posted, celebrating at a resort. The one I actually own. Can you imagine? They left me out of my own life, and the worst part, they didn't even notice. I'd been looking forward to this Christmas more than any I could remember. It had been a long year, longer than most, and for once, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would feel different, that maybe I'd be part of something, not just watching from the sidelines with a fake smile and a gift card no one remembered they gave me. For 3 months, I had poured myself into it. Late nights sewing personalized stockings, weekends baking test batches of cinnamon apple pies, hand-painting tiny snowflakes onto ornaments with everyone's initials. My apartment smelled like nutmeg, orange peel, and pine for weeks. I rearranged furniture, ordered a new rug just for the entryway, and carefully wrapped a dozen gifts with handwritten tags in gold ink. It wasn't just about decorating, it was hope. That hope maybe my mom would see how much I wanted to make things right. That Dorian, my older brother, would finally look at me and see more than the one who took a different path. That Dad would smile at me without the quiet judgment tucked behind his glasses. I imagined us laughing, passing plates across the table, telling old stories. I imagined belonging. The text came at 7:03 a.m. on a Wednesday. From Dad, just one sentence. This Christmas is for adults only. Hope you understand. At first, I blinked, thinking I missed something. Scrolling up, down, was there another message? A joke? A link? Nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, coffee untouched. The steam rose between my face and the screen like a line I wasn't supposed to cross. I reread the words, searching for a hidden meaning. For adults only. I was 33. I paid my mortgage, paid taxes, ran a company. But apparently, I still didn't qualify. My stomach turned cold. My fingers moved slowly as I typed back, "Got it. Merry Christmas." I didn't hit send right away. I stared at the blinking cursor next to that last period. Got it. It felt too small. But anything else, any word of anger, hurt, or confusion, would just feed the narrative that I was the one who made things complicated. So I tapped send. The message whooshed into the void. For a moment, I just sat there. The hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, the faint vibration of the heater. Everything felt louder, or maybe I was just hollow. I stood up, walked to the living room, and looked at the tree. It glowed softly, ornaments shimmering in early morning light. The gifts beneath it were wrapped in red and green, ribbons curled just right. I had even packed emergency batteries for the kids' toys. I picked up the box with Cassie written in gold ink, my niece. I had gotten her a build-your-own telescope set, one she mentioned in a letter to Santa last year. I placed it gently back under the tree. Then I went to the fridge. Inside was everything I needed for Christmas dinner: honey-glazed ham, rosemary potatoes, gingered carrots, cranberry sauce. I stared at it, numb, then began pulling things out. One by one, I lined the counters like soldiers reporting for duty. Then, I opened the trash can. Not everything made it in. I couldn't throw away the pies, or the cranberry sauce. That felt too final. So I placed them back on the shelf, knowing they'd expire before they were ever eaten. I sat on the floor beside the tree, knees tucked to my chest, arms around them like scaffolding. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just stopped. My family had decided I didn't belong this year. They said it plainly, adults only, which meant what? That I wasn't enough of an adult because I didn't have a husband? Kids? Because I wore jeans to Thanksgiving and skipped baby showers? Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe they just didn't want the reminder that their idea of success had a sister who didn't quite fit the mold. I reached for the remote and turned off the tree. It flickered once, then faded into darkness. I spent the rest of the day doing nothing, scrolling, rewrapping a gift that didn't need it, rechecking my email. I tried to pretend it didn't sting, but the truth sat in my throat like a swallowed stone. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and curled up on the couch. The ornaments glinted in the faint light from the street lamp outside. My phone buzzed. A notification. Dorian had just posted an album. Christmas at Westridge Lodge. The cover photo was a family shot. Mom in a winter white coat, Dad holding a mug near the fireplace, Dorian's wife, smiling wide, and Cassie, in matching pajamas, holding a gingerbread cookie. The caption read, "Finally, a drama-free Christmas with the people who matter most." I dropped my phone. It bounced once on the cushion before going still. Drama-free. People who matter most. I felt my heart slow, like my body was bracing for something, and I didn't even know what. I picked up the phone again, scrolled, another photo, then another. Then I saw it. The hallway, the fireplace, the balcony view. I knew that place. Westridge Lodge, the one I owned. I didn't sleep that night. After seeing the lodge and Dorian's photos, I couldn't stop pacing. I must have crossed the same floorboard in my apartment 100 times before I even realized I was walking in circles. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed in, like the walls were listening. I ended up in bed sometime around 2, but my eyes never closed. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, the hum of its motor slightly off balance, just enough to bother me. I kept thinking, over and over, did they know? No, they couldn't have. Dorian wouldn't post those pictures if he had even the faintest idea, unless he did. That thought stuck to me like gum under a shoe. A little after 3 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't even flinch. I reached for it like muscle memory and saw the notification. Dorian Kimes added 17 new photos to the album. Christmas at Westridge Lodge. My breath caught. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then I tapped. The album opened, and there they were. All of them, smiling like life was exactly as it should be. Mom was in a white fur-trimmed coat, holding a steaming mug beside the stone fireplace I designed. Dad was seated in a high-backed chair, legs crossed like a politician at a press conference. Cassie wore flannel reindeer pajamas and was perched on a bench, holding a gingerbread cookie bigger than her face. The caption? Finally, a drama-free Christmas with the people who matter most. It took me a full 30 seconds to process the words. Drama-free. People who matter most. Like I wasn't either. I scrolled. Dorian stood by the fire in another photo, one hand tucked into the pocket of his overpriced sweater, the other resting on Jessica's shoulder like she was some rare ornament he found in Europe. They looked like a holiday ad, charming, wholesome, filtered to perfection. Then came the comments. So classy. You always throw the best gatherings. Where's Briar? I stopped at that one. It had 5 likes. Then I saw Dorian's reply. It's adults only this year. She's doing her own thing. That thing. That was me. Reduced to ellipses. Doing her own thing. As if I were off hiking some vague trail or having a crisis that no one wanted to deal with. Not a sister, not a daughter, just a side note with questionable taste. I swallowed something bitter and kept scrolling, even though I should have stopped. Then I saw the photo that changed everything. The fireplace, the lodge balcony, the signature green-trimmed curtains, the leather chairs imported from Italy, custom-made. I'd chosen them myself. I zoomed in on the pattern etched into the side table. My initials, MH. They were subtle, designed to blend into the wood grain. But I knew they were there, because I'd put them there. That resort, Westridge Lodge, was mine. Not in the emotional sense, not because I loved it or felt attached to the decor. I meant legally, on paper. Through my company, under my parent holding brand, I owned that resort. And there they were, basking in it, calling it their perfect Christmas. I stood from bed, heart pounding now, not with sadness but with a sharp, cutting sort of disbelief. I walked to my desk and powered on my laptop. It took a moment to boot. I typed in my executive portal credentials, fingers moving automatically. Once inside, I navigated to the guest registry. It was there in black and white. Dorian Kimes, Jessica Kimes, 1 child, 2 additional adults, Vera and Eldon Grinstead. Booking type, Corporate Tier 1 VIP. Approval level. Executive override. Code MH1432. My code, my account. They had used my executive perks, my company's benefits. Somewhere, somehow, Dorian had pulled a string. Maybe it was through an old classmate who worked under my brand. Maybe he didn't even know it was mine. But that was unlikely. He wasn't clueless. He just didn't care. They had come to my resort, used my access, lived in the lap of my hard work, and didn't mention me once. I scanned further down the guest comments. More praise for Dorian. Dorian, you always make things magical. You nailed it again. Your attention to detail is insane. Your daughter's lucky to have such a thoughtful dad. I shut the laptop, maybe a little harder than I meant to. Then I stood, staring out the window. Downtown Denver was quiet at that hour. A few street lamps flickered. Somewhere, a snowplow scraped against asphalt. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Not tired, just done. How many times had I stepped aside? At birthdays, I'd offered to help, but was told, "Let Jessica handle it. She's better at parties." At Thanksgiving, I made dishes no one touched. At weddings, I was seated next to the coat rack or the cousin no one liked, and every time I told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't doing it to be seen, that family wasn't about recognition, it was about love. But that night, watching them in the lodge I built, praising Dorian for a fantasy I financed, I knew better. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had erased me. I paced slowly, letting each step echo through my apartment. I didn't need to turn on the lights. I knew this space, every inch. Just like I knew Westridge, every design choice, every contract signed. Every late night I spent working with engineers and developers to get the reservation system just right. My family never asked what I did. Not really. To them, I just worked with computers. I had let them own the narrative for so long, because challenging it meant confrontation. And if you don't play the part of the easygoing, low-maintenance sister, you become the problem. But as I stood there in the dark, my jaw clenched and fingers curled into fists at my sides, I realized something simple and sharp. If they were so determined to write me out of their story, maybe it was time I started writing my own. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I opened my laptop again. The next day, I didn't get out of bed until I absolutely had to. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to figure out what to do with everything that had happened. The silence in my apartment was deafening, and I couldn't shake the image of my family, laughing, enjoying themselves in my resort, a place they had no idea they owed to me. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I unlocked it. I couldn't resist checking one more time. I opened the photos Dorian had posted last night. Those perfect little snapshots of my family at the lodge. Each picture, each smile, every last one of them felt like a punch in the gut. The captions on those photos stung like acid. But it was something else that burned deeper. The realization that they didn't just forget me this Christmas, they erased me. I sighed and pushed myself out of bed. I had to do something, anything. But lying here, letting the resentment fester, wasn't going to change anything. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the executive portal for Westridge Lodge. I wasn't just a guest at this place. I was the owner. The dashboard lit up in front of me, all the operations of the resort now available at the tips of my fingers. I went straight to the security feeds, anonymously of course, and there they were, my family. Every one of them lounging in the resort's main lounge, laughing, unaware of the eyes watching them from my office in Denver. My stomach churned as I clicked through the footage. There was Mom, looking elegant in a fur stole, holding a glass of brandy. Dad, smiling for the camera, as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Dorian and Jessica, looking like the picture-perfect couple, and Cassie, always the star of the show, sitting at their feet with a giant stuffed bear. I zoomed in on the bookings. Everything had been cleared through my authorization. The VIP suite, the custom ski lessons, the spa treatments, all of it, made possible through my corporate connections. I was the one who'd signed the contracts for all of this. They didn't even know it, but they were staying in a suite I personally selected for its exclusivity. I had always been the one to make sure everything ran smoothly, always in the background, always invisible. The anger bubbled up inside me, but it didn't feel like I expected it to. It wasn't rage, it was something much colder, calculated, and it made me want to smile. This time, I wasn't going to be invisible. I was going to make them see me, every last one of them. I leaned back in my chair and closed the security feed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I typed in my old executive login. M.H. Harrison. That was the name I used when I first started the company, the alias I'd created to protect my identity. It wasn't some corporate mask. It was the real me, the one who had worked tirelessly for everything I'd built. I didn't need them to understand my job. I didn't need them to appreciate the long hours, the sacrifices. I didn't need their validation anymore. What I needed was control. I clicked through to the resort's guest management system. My family's reservation was the first on the list. I looked at it for a moment, watching the names fill the screen. Eldon, Vera, Dorian, Jessica, Cassie, all of them, under one roof, under my roof. And it made me sick to think that none of them even realized the power I had over their perfect Christmas. I clicked on the profile, then scrolled to the service details. There it was, the VIP package. But what caught my eye wasn't the luxury add-ons or the personalized services. It was the high-sensitivity note I'd left in the system for all VIP reservations. I hadn't even realized I had done it, but it was there. A safeguard for a special client, a detail I must have overlooked in my early morning haze. I hadn't intended for it to apply to my family, but now it felt like fate. Now it was perfect. I tapped on the high sensitivity alert and highlighted it. Then I instructed the guest services team to reroute every service through me directly. If they wanted to stay in a luxury resort, have spa treatments, ski lessons, and meals delivered to their suite. It was all going to be on my terms now. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and closed the laptop. I could feel the power flowing back into me, no longer the woman forgotten in the background. This was mine to control, and I wasn't going to let them forget it, not anymore. The next day, things started moving fast. I didn't confront them directly. I wasn't going to make a scene. I had learned from years of quiet suffering that there were more effective ways to get someone's attention. A phone call would just make them defensive. A confrontation would make them feel justified in their neglect. I needed to do this on my terms. So I began adjusting their itinerary. I changed their dinner reservation. I bumped them from the fine dining restaurant to the Mountain View Cafe, the family-friendly restaurant with a much more casual atmosphere. I knew Dorian would hate it. He had been so excited about impressing his wife with the upscale experience, but now he'd have to settle for something far less glamorous. I also swapped out their private ski lessons for group ones. I wasn't trying to punish them, but I figured if they wanted to experience the luxury of my resort without ever acknowledging me, they should experience it the way most families did, with the crowds, the lines, and the long waits. I wasn't about to let them get away with this. That night, my mother called. I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear her explanations or her weak attempts to justify excluding me. Instead, I focused on the work I had in front of me. I had always done the heavy lifting. Now, I was going to do it my way. As the days passed, I watched. I watched them live out their perfect Christmas in my resort, living in the world I created, under the banner of my name. And they still didn't know. They still didn't understand that it wasn't Dorian who had made this happen. It wasn't him who had built all of this. It was me. And soon, they would know exactly who had been behind the curtain all along. I had always kept my distance from my family's drama, but this time it felt different. The silence between us grew heavier, thicker with each passing hour. They hadn't just ignored me, they had made it clear that my existence, my worth, was secondary. And now, as I stood there, watching them enjoy the luxury that I'd built for them, a familiar bitterness settled in the pit of my stomach. The morning sun barely crept through the blinds in my apartment, casting long, cold shadows across the room. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to face the world, but the weight of their mockery was unbearable. I reached for my phone, determined to do something, anything, to stop feeling so powerless. Then, a text flashed on the screen. A message from Marcus, the resort's manager. He had forwarded me a staff log from the morning. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly as I read it. Apparently, my family was basking in the comfort of the same suite I'd stayed in many times before. A cheerful housekeeper, apparently too loose-lipped for her own good, had mentioned it. "We don't get Ms. Briar much anymore in this suite, but she always left it spotless," she had said, apparently without realizing what she'd just let slip. The moment hung in the air. For a second, it felt like the room went still, like time itself paused. Then, just as quickly, the awkward silence was broken by Vera, who quickly shifted the conversation elsewhere. It was clear that no one, not even them, had bothered to consider who really made this possible. They didn't think twice before dismissing me as irrelevant, someone to be erased, but now they couldn't ignore me, not anymore. I closed my phone and took a deep breath. No more hiding. This wasn't a game anymore. If they wanted to erase me, I would write myself back into the story. Hours later, I was on a video call with Marcus, asking about the small details that seemed to be slipping past them. He was a bit nervous, aware that he was essentially my eyes and ears on the ground, but I knew him. He wouldn't disappoint me. As we talked, I could hear Dorian's voice in the background. He was speaking loudly, as he often did, assuming everyone could hear him. His wife's laughter followed, but there was something sharp about it. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew it wasn't good. Later that afternoon, Marcus sent another message, this time something that would set everything in motion. One of the concierges asked if the guests were related to M.H. Harrison. Your mother laughed and said, "Not a chance. My daughter works in computers, nothing glamorous." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The words didn't sting like I expected them to. Instead, they solidified everything I had known deep down. My mother, the woman who had once claimed to love me, had no idea who I had become. She hadn't bothered to ask. She didn't care. None of them did. They were still living in their illusion of superiority, completely unaware of the truth. I closed the phone and stared into the empty room. I could feel my grip on control tightening. They wanted to live this life, the luxury, the image, without acknowledging me. Fine, I'd let them. But I was going to make them feel the difference. The next day, as they settled into their usual routines, I set the wheels in motion. I couldn't confront them directly, not yet, but I could adjust their experience, one subtle move at a time. They wouldn't even know what hit them. First, I redirected their spa time. Instead of the exclusive, top-tier slots they had been assigned, I booked them into the family-friendly sessions, the ones filled with chatter and noisy kids. It wasn't an outright insult, but it was enough to remind them that their world wasn't as perfect as they thought. Next, I adjusted their dinner reservations. No more fine dining in an elegant room overlooking the snow-capped mountains. Instead, I gave them a cozy little table in the Mountain View Cafe. The food was just as good, but the atmosphere was different. It was loud, bustling, and filled with families, nothing like the elegant, refined experience they had expected. Lastly, I asked Marcus to pass along a message to the staff. From this point forward, there would be no more special treatment for them. No deferential smiles, no whispers of anything you need, just ask. They were just another family, and they would be treated like one, professional, polite, but nothing more. As I settled back into my chair, sipping my coffee, I couldn't help but smile. They wouldn't know it yet, but they were already being downgraded. Every small, subtle change would get under their skin, and when they realized it, it would be too late. I hadn't said a word to them. I didn't need to. My actions spoke louder than anything I could say. The next morning, Dorian called. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear him defend himself or justify his behavior. Instead, I went about my day, letting them wonder what was happening to their perfect holiday. As the day wore on, I kept an eye on them through the resort's live feed. I couldn't help but watch. I saw Dorian, his face growing more frustrated with every little inconvenience I had put in place. He didn't know it, but the game had already begun. Every moment was just another step toward my final move. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I felt the weight of the day catch up with me. I had given them a warning without a single word. But the next move? The next move would not be silent. The air in the office felt thicker than usual, the weight of what I'd just done hanging over me. I'd given them their first warning. Silent? subtle, but I had no intention of stopping there. They had underestimated me for far too long, and now, with each calculated move, I was taking back what had always been mine. The phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Marcus, the manager at Westridge Lodge. "Hey, Briar," he said, his tone polite but professional, the kind that comes with a hint of apology. "We've had a little issue with the bookings. The VIP suite your family's in. It seems there's been a conflict with the scheduling." I could hear the hum of activity in the background, the distant clatter of dishes, the soft murmur of voices, and I knew that my family was still nestled in their little bubble, oblivious to the chaos unfolding behind the scenes. "Can you move them?" I asked, a sense of calm settling over me. I had already decided how I was going to handle this. "Reassign them to a different suite. One with a good view, but not as grand." Marcus hesitated for just a moment, then responded with a quiet, "Got it." I knew he didn't want to anger them, but he also knew his loyalty was to me. The call ended, and I felt a sense of control return. Dorian was about to get a small taste of what it felt like to be on the other side of the privilege he took for granted. Later that afternoon, as the sky outside grew heavy with the promise of rain, I watched through the surveillance feed as the Grinstead family made their way down the grand corridor toward the lobby. I saw Dorian, looking irritated, and Vera, whose silence spoke volumes. I wondered what they'd think when they were told they had to leave the VIP suite. When the time came, Marcus called Dorian, explaining the situation in his usual courteous manner. "Mr. Grinstead," Marcus said, "we've encountered a conflict with your booking and will need to relocate you to a different suite. The Mountain View family suite is available for you, plenty comfortable but not quite as luxurious." Dorian's voice crackled with annoyance. "What do you mean? That's where she stays. Where's Briar? Why is she making these decisions?" I could practically hear the disbelief in his voice, the sense of entitlement that had been so deeply ingrained in him. It was clear to me that he thought the world would bend to his will, but today, it wasn't going to. "Please accept our apologies for the inconvenience," Marcus added, his voice steady. "We're happy to assist you with your transition." I waited, not feeling the slightest trace of sympathy for the man who had never once acknowledged the years of sacrifice I'd made to build this life. The sound of footsteps approaching the new suite brought me back to the present. I took a sip of my coffee, barely flinching as I watched them enter the room. It was a fine room by all accounts, clean, well-maintained, with a view of the mountains, but it wasn't the exclusive luxury they had come to expect. The irony wasn't lost on me. They would be forced to live in the reality of my world for a while, and maybe, just maybe, they would begin to understand what it meant to be left out. By the time evening rolled around, I had already moved on to the next stage of my plan. Dorian's tantrum hadn't been as spectacular as I'd hoped, but I knew it would come in time. The more they pushed, the harder they fell. Vera, on the other hand, was quieter, but I could feel her fury in every step she took. She wanted answers, but I wasn't going to give them to her. Later that night, as I passed through the lobby on my way to a management meeting, my gaze fell on the resort's Founders Families display. It was a nice touch, pictures of past guests, family portraits commemorating their stay at Westridge Lodge. Among the photos was one of my family, taken the last time they had visited. That was before the cracks in our relationship had started to show. I stopped in front of the display, my eyes locked on the smiling faces of my family. The picture was a stark reminder of the person they had once tried to make me out to be, someone they could easily fit into their narrative of the perfect family. But that was before I had learned my worth. That was before I had learned to stop begging for a seat at their table. I took one last look at the photo, the smiles frozen in time, and I made my decision. I turned on my heel, walking to my office with a clear sense of purpose. "Marcus," I said, once the door was shut behind me, "take the family portrait down, now." It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. The image had no place here anymore. Not in my world, not in the world I was building for myself. Marcus didn't question me. He knew. The next morning, I got a message from him. "The portrait has been removed. No one's asked about it yet, but staff noticed." I could almost hear Vera's voice in my head. The tightness in her expression when she walked past that empty space on the wall. She wouldn't say a word, but I could feel her discomfort. That was the point. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about making them uncomfortable enough to realize their own mistakes without me saying a word. Later that day, I saw them again, standing by the reception desk, discussing the details of their stay. There was tension in the air, but they were careful not to show it. The absence of the portrait was already bothering them more than they let on. They were starting to feel the subtle erosion of their privilege. It wasn't enough to humiliate them. It was just enough to make them question everything they thought they knew about the world they had built. And that was exactly what I wanted. The quiet hum of the resort at night contrasted sharply with the storm brewing within me. I had already taken control in my own way, asserting my authority without so much as a word to my family. But I knew they weren't going to accept the quiet rebuke for long. The silence, while powerful, was never going to be enough for them. I sat in my office, the soft glow of the computer screen illuminating my face as I finished reviewing a report from the day's operations. The comfort of my control, however, was interrupted by the ping of a new notification on my phone. It was from Vera. She had posted something on Facebook, and it was only a matter of time before I saw it. I opened the app with a certain detachment, the kind that only comes after years of living under the weight of their expectations. Vera's post was long, full of subtle barbs wrapped in a veneer of sweetness. It didn't mention me directly, but it didn't have to. The implications were loud and clear. It's sad when even five-star resorts forget how to treat family with dignity during the holidays. Beneath her words, the mask of politeness slipped just enough for anyone who knew the truth to see the jab aimed squarely at me. It didn't surprise me. I was used to this, the passive-aggressive barbs, the attempts to paint me as the outsider, the one who never belonged. But what came next caught me off guard. Friends and family, as expected, commented with sympathy, the usual parade of concern, but a few of them, whether out of curiosity or misplaced concern, asked, "Isn't that the lodge where Briar works?" I watched as Vera deleted the comments within seconds. There was no denying it now. She was trying to control the narrative, keep her image intact. She didn't want anyone to know how deep the cut really went, how she really felt about me. But there was one thing she didn't realize. I had already stopped caring about her version of the story. It was amusing in a way, how predictable it all was, but it was also unsettling. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wouldn't let her rewrite the story this time. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. The anger I felt wasn't hot and sharp anymore. It was a cold, simmering thing. Vera was playing a dangerous game, one that I was already prepared to win. The next day, I knew what I had to do. Vera's public complaint hadn't been enough to break the silence. It had barely even left a dent, so I pushed further. I wasn't going to let her get away with insulting me, with trying to paint herself as the victim when she had never cared to truly understand my side. I waited for the right moment, the kind of moment that would sting enough to make them sit up and take notice, and it came when I least expected it. As I sipped my morning coffee in my office, a message from Marcus popped up on my screen. "Vera just submitted an official complaint to the resort," he said. She mentioned the downgrade and, of course, the missing portrait. I read it again, the icy grip of resolve tightening in my chest. This was the move I'd been waiting for. They had pushed too far this time. They thought they could toy with me, treat me like an afterthought, and get away with it. Not anymore. By the time the evening rolled around, the letter was on its way. Marcus had made sure it was delivered to the Grinstead family suite in the most discreet way possible, slipped under the door just as it had been prepared. I didn't know what to expect, but I was ready. I wasn't going to let them win this time. The envelope was everything I had envisioned. Premium linen, gold embossed with the Westridge Holdings logo, the kind of letter that demanded respect, that spoke to the power behind the name it carried. As I waited, the minutes stretching on, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. They were finally going to have to face the truth, whether they liked it or not. And then it came. A soft ping from my phone. Marcus had sent me a picture of the letter. Vera had opened it. The look on her face said it all. "Thank you for your feedback, Mrs. Grinstead. We take your concerns seriously. As a gesture of goodwill, please accept 2 additional nights at no charge. Signed, M.H. Harrison, owner, Westridge Holdings. Her expression twisted as she read the letter again. She was confused, uncertain, and more than a little unsettled. M.H. Harrison. That name. I could only imagine the realization dawning on her. I didn't need to say a word. I knew the seed had been planted. The doubt was already there, taking root. I waited for her reaction, the tension between us palpable even through the digital space that separated us. It was only a matter of time before she confronted me, if she even dared to. Dorian, of course, brushed it off as nothing. Coincidence, he muttered when I saw him later in the evening. He didn't seem bothered by the letter, didn't seem to care that something bigger was at play. But Vera? She clutched the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. Her face was unreadable, but I could see the shift in her eyes, the tiny crack in the ice that had formed between us. She didn't sleep well that night, I could tell. The next morning, things took an interesting turn. As I watched from my office window, the Grinstead family gathered in the lobby, the tension hanging thick between them. I noticed Cassie, their youngest, tugging at Vera's sleeve, asking a question. "Why hasn't Aunt Briar come this year?" she asked, her voice soft and innocent. The words hung in the air like a challenge. It was the question no one had dared to ask, but it was the one that could no longer be avoided. The truth was no longer hiding. It was staring them in the face. They just hadn't said it out loud yet. I could feel it. This was the moment they would finally have to confront the truth. The silence between us had stretched long enough. I'd moved the pieces of the game into place, each shift subtle, but each one significant. Now they would see it, whether they wanted to or not. The Grinstead family had spent the day in stunned confusion, their lives slowly unraveling as the veil of their perfect narrative started to slip. What they hadn't realized yet was that this was no longer about a few minor inconveniences. This was about the truth they had avoided for far too long. Dorian sat in the lounge, talking to a group of investors he'd met during the networking dinner earlier in the week. The buzz of conversation around him seemed distant as he sipped on a drink, his posture stiff and overly controlled. He wanted to seem relaxed, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously. He hadn't yet connected the dots fully, but the pieces were coming together. A man in the group pointed to a framed photo hanging on the wall, a common piece of decor in the lodge, one that many guests passed without a second thought. "That woman, Briar, right? I know her. Invested in her booking algorithm years ago. She runs Westridge, doesn't she?" Dorian froze, his face drained of color. I could almost hear his heart thudding from across the room. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I'm not sure," Dorian stammered, trying to cover his tracks. But it was too late. The damage was done. The name Briar had been spoken, and the connection had been made. The man didn't press further, thankfully, but the damage was done. I watched Dorian's expression shift from discomfort to confusion to something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. He quickly excused himself from the group and made his way back to the suite. By the time he reached the room, his agitation had only grown. He slammed the door open, his face flushed with a mix of frustration and fear. Vera, as usual, was the first to notice his change in mood. "What's wrong?" she asked, barely lifting her eyes from the envelope in her hands, the one from M.H. Harrison. Dorian barely glanced at her before muttering, "I think I've made a huge mistake." Vera's face tightened. She knew, deep down, that something had shifted, and she wasn't sure she liked it, but instead of asking questions, she just stared at the envelope. She knew this was the moment, the tipping point where everything changed, even if she didn't fully understand why. As I watched from my office feed, I couldn't help but wonder what was going through their minds. They had always taken me for granted, always assumed they could control the narrative, but now it was unraveling, piece by piece. That evening, as the lodge hosted the guest appreciation night in the main atrium, I could see it all unfolding. A short film, The Spirit of Westridge, was playing on a large screen. It was meant to showcase the lodge's legacy, its history, its charm. It was glossy, well-produced, everything I had envisioned when I'd built this place. But this time, the footage was different. It was personal. The camera panned across snowy landscapes, showing shots of the lodge, the staff, the smiling guests. And then the focus shifted, a slow zoom into a younger version of me. There I was, touring the construction site, meeting with architects, talking to staff. I was laughing, commanding, present, just as I had been in those early days when Westridge was nothing more than a dream. And then the voiceover hit like a punch to the gut. Founded by M.H. Harrison, also known as Briar Row. I saw Dorian's face go white. Vera's mouth fell open. The room went silent. They all recognized me now. The woman they had ignored, belittled, and erased for so many years was the very person who had made their lives possible, the foundation of everything they'd been pretending to own. A guest seated at a nearby table turned to Dorian, asking the obvious question. "Would you like us to leave a message for Mrs. So?" "Row?" Dorian's face tightened, his jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. How could he? How could he explain away the truth now when it was staring him in the face? Vera sat frozen, her glass of wine still held in her hand, the color draining from her face. Her eyes darted back and forth between the screen and Dorian, as if seeking some explanation, some sign that this was all just a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding, no more denial. The truth was undeniable. It had always been me, the one who had worked tirelessly to build this place, the one who had made the connections, put in the hours, fought to make Westridge what it was, the one they had disregarded for so long. And now they had to face it. They couldn't pretend anymore. As the credits rolled and the guests began to shuffle out of the atrium, the air was thick with tension. The Grinstead family remained seated, the weight of the moment too much for them to process all at once. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that everything they had believed about me, everything they had told themselves, was a lie. But no one spoke. No one dared to. I watched from my office, feeling the sting of everything that had led to this moment. The years of silence, the years of being overlooked, taken for granted. I had been invisible to them for so long. But now I was the one in control. I had given them one last warning without uttering a single word. I had shown them, without needing to explain, that the power had always been mine. And now, the next move was theirs. The room was still. The silence hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, they finally heard me. I walked into the cafe that morning with the same casual ease I had always carried myself with, though this time there was something different about the way I moved, more certain, more deliberate. It wasn't about drawing attention. I didn't need their recognition. No, it was about reclaiming my space, asserting the power I had always held but had let slip through my fingers for far too long. I could feel their eyes the moment I entered, Dorian and Vera sitting together in a quiet corner. Their posture stiffened when I walked past them. I didn't even spare them a glance. Their faces, pale and drawn, were like mirrors reflecting everything they had never wanted to see. I didn't stop to engage with them. Instead, I went straight to Cassie, my niece, sitting at a table in the center of the room. She was too young to understand the undercurrents of what was happening, but in that moment, she was the one I wanted to speak to the most. I knelt beside her, the smile I gave her warm and genuine. "I heard you like strawberry pancakes," I said softly, leaning in so she could hear me. Cassie's face lit up immediately. She dropped her fork and jumped up to hug me. "Aunt Briar." "Why weren't you at Christmas?" she asked, her voice innocent, untainted by the drama surrounding us. I smiled again, but it was bittersweet this time. "Sometimes people forget who matters," I replied, my voice steady, without a trace of anger. Cassie blinked, clearly trying to understand, but before she could ask any more questions, I pressed a kiss to her forehead and stood up. I could feel the tension in the room heightening, the way the air seemed to shift around us. Vera's eyes followed me as I walked away, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Dorian, on the other hand, seemed frozen, a look of utter disbelief written all over his face. They hadn't expected me to show up, and now that I had, they didn't know how to process it. The moment I left, the room seemed to breathe again. The servers, who had been watching from the edges of the room, straightened up. Their body language had been stiff, careful, like they were walking on eggshells. But now, there was a noticeable shift. They no longer had to pretend they didn't know what was happening. Back in their corner, Dorian and Vera exchanged a few whispered words, though I could tell they were trying to keep up appearances, but the damage had been done. As I walked out of the cafe and back into the main lobby, I could hear the low murmur of conversation starting up again, whispers turning to speculation. They were trying to figure out what to say, how to explain me, how to explain the woman they had tried to erase for so long. Later that day, as the clock ticked toward the late afternoon, I felt a sense of finality settling over me. I had made my presence known, but now it was time to do something that would ensure the message wasn't lost. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, and began to type. The piece I'd been working on was ready. I sent it out to a leading lifestyle magazine, one that would give my voice the audience it needed. The op-ed was simple, honest, no bitterness, no venom, just the raw truth of what had happened. I was told Christmas was for adults, I wrote, so I gave mine to strangers who valued it. It was as much a personal statement as it was a public one. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. But the world needed to know. I shared my story, how I had been excluded, how I had built Westridge with my own hands, how I had been overlooked for years by the very people who now claimed ownership of my work. It wasn't revenge, it was just the truth. Within hours, my words spread. The article went viral. I watched as comments flooded in, some supportive, others skeptical, but all were engaging. The power of my voice had never been clearer than in that moment. The Grinsteads, on the other hand, were left in stunned silence, the weight of the truth sinking in. It didn't take long for Dorian to receive a printed version of the article. A sticky note was attached to it. "Enjoy the rest of your stay. I'll be elsewhere. Briar." I could almost hear his breath catch as he read it. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Vera, on the other hand, sat on the bed in their suite, shaking. The note was still in her hand, her fingers trembling as if she couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. She hadn't expected this. No one had. They thought they had power over me. They thought I would always be the one who faded into the background, the one who couldn't assert herself. But now they saw. I had given them one final warning, without words. I had made my mark, and they could no longer pretend I didn't exist. The room they can't re-enter. They lost access to me the moment they decided I didn't belong. And now, I had nothing left to give them. The morning started like any other, yet it felt different. A certain quiet settled over the breakfast room at the resort, a shift in energy that seemed to ripple through the air. I was already halfway through my coffee when I stepped in, wearing the quiet confidence that had been so absent from my life for years. I wasn't dressed for grandeur. I wasn't there to make a scene. But something inside me felt settled, like the calm before the storm. The Grinstead family was huddled in the back corner of the cafe, their eyes not meeting mine, though I could feel the weight of their attention. Dorian and Vera sat together, heads close, murmuring in a language of betrayal I had once been fluent in. They hadn't expected me. I could tell by the way their body language stiffened when I walked in. I moved past them without a glance, heading directly to Cassie's table. She sat with a plate of pancakes, her face lighting up as she saw me approach. I could feel the subtle crackle of tension in the room as I sat beside her. "I heard you like strawberry pancakes," I said, my voice soft yet deliberate. Cassie smiled wide and immediately jumped up to hug me. "Aunt Briar, why weren't you at Christmas?" Her question hit me like a gentle wave. There was no malice in her voice, only an honest curiosity from a child who still hadn't learned how complicated family could be. I returned her hug, the warmth of her embrace reminding me of the person I had always been. "Sometimes people forget who matters," I replied, a hint of sadness in my words that I quickly masked. She furrowed her brow, trying to understand, but I could see the confusion on her face. Before she could say more, I kissed her forehead and stood up. The room was tense, and I could feel eyes on my back as I walked away, but I didn't look back. I wasn't there for them anymore. As I stepped out of the cafe, I felt the change in the air behind me. The Grinsteads were left with their questions, their guilt, and their discomfort. I had made my presence known in the only way I could, quietly, but with undeniable force. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk, staring at the words on my screen. The op-ed I'd written was ready. I clicked send and watched it go live. The article spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was picked up by multiple outlets. The headline: I was told Christmas was for adults, so I gave mine to strangers who valued it. It wasn't a cry for revenge, it was the truth, and that alone was enough. By the time Dorian received a printed version of the article, I had already shifted my focus. The Grinsteads were no longer my concern. The quiet satisfaction of having taken control of my narrative was enough for now. The letter, with its simple sticky note attached, was brief. Enjoy the rest of your stay. I'll be elsewhere. Briar. Dorian didn't say a word when he read it. He didn't need to. But Vera did. She sat on their bed, holding the note, her hands trembling. I could almost hear the silent questions racing through her mind. The silence was deafening. They had always been able to ignore me, but now they couldn't. Now they had to face the truth. Hours later, I sat in my own room, looking out the window at the pristine white snow falling gently outside. There was a certain beauty in the coldness, in the stillness. It was a kind of peace that I hadn't known I needed. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I was finally free. Vera was beginning to understand. And Dorian? Well, his punishment had just begun. It wasn't my doing. It was the consequences of his own actions, of a lifetime of never truly seeing me for who I was. Later that day, as I sipped my coffee, I received a new email alert. It was from the Patricia Grinstead Women's Leadership Scholarship. I had always planned to make an impact, but this was something different, something I would never have done had I stayed in their world. The letter was formal, with the scholarship's mission statement neatly printed at the top. It was dedicated to women who were never heard, always watching, a nod to the way my mother had been treated, and to me. But there was no personal message from Briar, no phone call, just paperwork, cold and unfeeling. The decision had been made for me. I let the letter fall onto the table, my thoughts wandering back to my mother. She had been the one who had given me strength, even when she had been silenced. I was not going to repeat her mistakes. I thought back to the days of my youth when I used to go through old family albums, searching for something to hold on to. There was one photograph that always caught my eye. Me, at 7 years old, sitting in front of a Christmas tree, my face glowing with excitement. I was holding a glittered ornament in my tiny hands. It was a memory I had tried to bury, but not anymore. This was my past, my family, my pain. Yet, I didn't need to carry it anymore. I stood up and walked to the photo box, pulling it out. I stared at the picture for a long moment before gently placing it back and sealing the box shut. It was time to create new memories. In Telluride, I set a table with 7 chairs. 6 for guests from the local shelter, 1 left intentionally empty. When someone asked why, I simply replied, "For the people we love, even if they never knew how to love us back." The emptiness of that seat didn't bother me. It was a symbol of what I had lost, but also of what I had gained. I didn't need them to define me anymore. I had found my place, and it wasn't with the family who had forgotten who I was. I looked out the window as snow continued to fall, knowing that I would never be that forgotten guest again. Not in this place, not in my life. As we come to the end of this story, it's clear that family isn't always about blood, it's about respect, trust, and being seen. Briar's journey shows us how sometimes we need to take control of our own narrative, even when it means walking away from those who should have been there for us. If you've ever felt overlooked, or even betrayed by the ones you love, remember that your worth is never defined by their actions. What are your thoughts on Briar's decision? Would you have done the same in her shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional family tales and lessons on finding your voice in difficult situations. See you in the next one.